Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX is a deck that I've been playing pretty much all season. I've earned the majority of my points this season with the deck, including my highest placement, which was a top 256 at the Gdansk Regionals. In making vlogs of Birmingham and EUIC, I've had a lot of people reach out for advice on the deck and some tips to help them play the deck better. So in this video, I thought I'd do a deep dive on one of my favorite decks in the Pokemon TCG to help you all out with playing it as well. In this video, we'll go over general fundamentals for playing the deck, like sequencing, managing your board, and how to effectively work towards your win condition. We'll then explore some specific matchups and gameplay to assess how to fight different decks. I believe that Grimmsnarl can combat the entire format, and hopefully by the end of this guide, you'll be able to as well. This guide will mostly be addressing how Grimm plays in the Ascended Heroes format, but we will end the video by talking about post-rotation too. With that being said, let's get into making you a master of Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX. Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX revolves around a general strategy of spreading damage around the board in order to checkmate your opponent. It is flexible though in that it can aggressively race your opponent and take prizes quickly if you set up well. Grimmsnarl's Punk Up ability allows it to accelerate energy to itself and your other Marnie's Pokemon, leaving your hand attachment free for Munkidori. This guy is one of the best cards in the game, and is even better when combined with Froslass, whose Freezing Shroud damages everything in play on both sides with an ability. So Froslass will leave damage on Munkidori itself, who can then send that damage to your opponent's side of the field. This, in combination with Grimmsnarl's Shadow Bullet hitting 180 to the active and 30 to the bench, generates a lot of damage for your opponent to deal with. There will be a few other Pokemon like Badoo and Blood Moon Ursaluna that help you out with their useful attacks at specific scenarios in the game, but most of the time Shadow Bullet is the attack that you want to be firing off the most. Ultimately though, in most matchups, the flexibility of spreading your damage around the board with Froslass and Munkidori will be how you win the game. So these three Pokemon are the most important ones to get into play. This deck is all powered by an engine focused around your supporters. Arven finds specific items and tools, Lily's Determination gives you big hands to work with, and Iono disrupts your opponents in the late game. A slight weakness of the deck is not always playing Fezandipiti EX to supplement your hand with extra cards, but it's a hard thing to justify benching when board space is so important. So to compensate, we play our consistency supporters in very high counts. Throughout the rest of the game, you'll use utility cards like Boss's Orders, Night Stretcher, Counter Catcher, and Technical Machine Devolution to help set up your win conditions. These are important cards to keep aware of, particularly in the mid to late game. But the real card that ties everything together is of course Secret Box. This can catapult you into the game by searching Buddy Buddy Poffin, Spikemouth Gym, TM Evolution, and your supporter for the following turn. This gets you an unholy amount of Pokemon search and usually has you firing off Shadow Bullets on your following turn. Here's the list that I'd be starting with in the Ascended Heroes format. However, there are other cards that you can play that allow for different scenarios to come up. So let's just touch on some tech options that you could play in the deck. Tatsugiri is a consistency Pokemon that can bail you out when you don't have a supporter in hand. It feels a bit clunky to play when it's not so easy to retreat, so I don't love it in the deck, but I do admit it has got me into games every now and then. Shaman and Psyduck's abilities protect the bench from direct bench damage or Dust Noir respectively, so they can help into things like Gardevoir, Terrabox, and Raging Bolt in Shaman's case, or specifically Dragapult in Psyduck's case. Other Dust Noir decks like Charizard and Lopunny will play Klefki, which will turn off the Psyduck's ability, so Psyduck is not very useful in those matchups. Energy Switch is useful for using an extra Munkidori in your turn, and so it helps into Gardevoir, Absol, and the Mirror Match when you're trying to get off more Adrenabrains than your opponent. And there are other more fringe tech options that you can play, but I think these are the main techs you consider for the deck. Consistency is so important as the deck can sometimes miss a supporter and just fall flat on its face, so you really can't afford to tech the deck out too much by cutting into your consistency cards. You always pick second with Grimmsnarl. As described before, the Secret Box will be your key to starting the game, and an Arven on turn 1 will usually be the card that gets you it. Your matchup and the rest of your hand will usually determine which stage 1s you TM Evo into. If you miss an energy in your opening hand, it's very reasonable to take Air Balloon off of your Secret Box and retreat into Badoo. This is fine to do in the majority of matchups as it slows your opponent down and buys time to set up, but TM Evo is always your ideal turn 1 attack. Spikemouth Gym is also a broken card, and having the flexibility to search for your Marnie's Pokemon whenever you like in your turn is incredibly handy. Often you may need to seek a Darkness energy to attach to Munkidori, so the correct way to sequence this is always to play your draw supporter before you Spike Myth. This makes you more likely to hit an energy to attach from your hand, and then search the remaining energies with Grimmsnarl's ability to start attacking with Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX. I also wanted to dedicate a short section to Frostlass, as it's quite a unique card in the game, and you'll often be reminding your opponent to tick damage on their Pokemon with abilities. Freezing Shroud happens during Pokemon checkup, meaning if Frostlass KOs something, then they don't get to use Pheasantipity EX, as Pheasantipity's ability reads that Flip the Script only works if a Pokemon was KO'd during your opponent's turn. I also want to talk about when Frostlass should and shouldn't tick, and I'm going to do this by highlighting a couple of cards that affect Frostlass's ability. The first card is Battle Cage. Some decks will play Battle Cage to counter Frostlass, but remember that it still damages your side and your opponent's active Pokemon, if any of those Pokemon have abilities. Also, if you're playing Psyduck in your deck, then you're turning off the abilities of Dusclops, Dusknoir, and Magneton. That means that they don't take Frostlass damage between turns if Psyduck is in play. These are a couple of scenarios to be really aware of, particularly if you're playing this deck in person, because you really just don't want to create broken game states. So just make sure you're really staying on top of when Frostlass should and shouldn't be ticking. So now let's move on to an overview of Grimmsnarl's matchup spread going into the Ascended Heroes format. Whilst this is just my opinion, I do think this gives a great insight into why Grimmsnarl is such an appealing deck to play. I've ordered the decks within the tier list based on their meta percentage at EUIC, and whilst I know Ascended Heroes will be a different format and some of these decks might move around a little bit in terms of their matchups into Grimmsnarl, I think this gives us a good picture of where the deck is at right now. Absol is your highest profile bad matchup, and you also take bad matchups into both Flareon and Terrabox, but these decks are taking up quite a low percentage of the total meta, so are reasonable decks that you could avoid. Gholdengo is not a great matchup, but I've put it in even just purely because if you get set up, you can win the matchup. The problem that you have against Gholdengo at the moment is that you just get outpaced a lot of the time, so that can make it difficult, but I do think these two factors balance themselves out, which is why I've tentatively put the deck into even. Dragapult, Dusknoir, and Gardevoir are two very high profile favored matchups, which is a huge boon for the deck, but on average you're more likely to be facing higher skilled players with these decks, so just be careful if you come up against it. Finally, I feel like Charizard is one of your best matchups overall, so you're always quite happy to see it, especially if it's quite popular in the meta. For this video, we're going to use some tabletop gameplay to demonstrate how to win against three of the most popular decks: Gholdengo, Gardevoir, and Dragapult. Against Gholdengo, you want to start the game with double Snow-Run and Impidimp down, and then use Technical Machine Evolution into both the Snow-Runs to get double Frostlass into play. There's two reasons why you want to go into double Frostlass at the start of the game. The first reason is to spread as much damage as possible with Freezing Shroud, but it's also to account for the fact that Gholdengo is going to boss KO the Frostlass to take it out. If you go into just one Frostlass, they'll take out your only one in play, and then you will miss a tick of Freezing Shroud, which will reduce the amount of damage you'll be able to spread to your opponent's side of the field. It is absolutely fine to just leave one Impidimp down on the bench, because if they go after the Impidimp, it's very easy to just respond with Badoo and build up more damage with Freezing Shroud whilst re-establishing your Impidimp. It's for the same reason that you tend to avoid putting Grimmsnarl into play for the majority of the game. You're only really going to evolve into it on a turn where it's going to take 3 to 4 prizes, or if it's going to win you the game. So usually you'll win the game via Grimmsnarl taking 3 prizes in a turn with a Shadow Bullet once you've set the damage up in such a way where something on the bench will be knocked out as well as the Gholdengo in the active, and then you usually close out the game with Ursaluna plus Monkey and Frostlass KOing something else on the bench. That's usually your 6 prizes, and it's pretty easy to do that in just 2 turns, so it's absolutely fine to go a couple of prizes behind because you know that you're going to come back and eventually win the game. Sometimes what the Gholdengo player will do is not evolve their Gimmighoul's into Gholdengos so that they aren't taking unnecessary Frostlass damage, and that means that the Frostlass will only really be damaging the Lunatone, as it will be the only Pokemon in play with an ability. If they're taking this line of play, that usually means that they're attacking with their Solrock in the active. That gives you the opportunity to go into an early Grimmsnarl and KO both Solrock and Lunatone in a single Shadow Bullet. In a lot of cases, this will force them to go into Gholdengos and potentially even put Genesect down, which is also a huge liability that will sit on their bench. But essentially what you're doing here is baiting the Gholdengo into play and then locking the energies in the discard pile by using Badoo's Itchy Pollen and setting up usually for a devolution play to win the game. Devolution is one of those attacks that's really worth just keeping an eye out for. You don't always win the game with it. However, if they're forced into a position where they have to evolve all three, it does open the door for you to win the game via devolution. Ultimately, the biggest thing for me in the Gholdengo matchup is forcing the game to take as many turns as possible. You do this via one prize board states because they are very, very frustrating for Gholdengo to deal with. If you get set up, it's quite reasonable to get into this position quite easily, so from there you should be able to win the game. Keep these things in mind when you face Gholdengo, and you should have a great time into the matchup. The Gardevoir matchup is complicated. On paper, it is a favourable matchup, but like I said earlier, on average you'll be facing very good players with the deck, and it is so inherently strong and also non-linear that actually there are a lot of different ways that you end up winning the game. The biggest thing that I want to get into here is the importance of playing Frostlass in this matchup. It's one of these things that you used to not do, but Frostlass is actually very important for winning the Munkidori War. Here's the math that you need to be aware of to easily pick monkeys off the board with Frostlass in play. 10 damage from Freezing Shroud at the beginning of your turn, 30 damage from your first Adrenabrain, 30 more damage from your second Adrenabrain, 30 more damage from sniping the Munkidori on the bench with Shadow Bullet, and the 10 damage from Frostlass at the end of the turn will be exactly 110 damage, which will KO a Munkidori on the bench. This makes Frostlass a crucial card for having more Munkidoris in play than your opponent. However, another really important part of winning the Gardevoir matchup is denying their comeback. What I mean by this is that when you go too far ahead on prizes, Gardevoir will use Iono, they'll counter-catcher your Frostlass, and they'll start using Screamtail to pick off your Munkidoris on the bench. So the really important thing to be very mindful of here is how you deny the Gardevoir's comeback potential. An example of this might be pre-attaching an energy to a Frostlass, so that it's not a target that they can counter-catcher and bring into the active spot to trap. The other big thing will be to not rush yourself down to just 1 or 2 prizes, as if you don't have a stable board state, an Iono can completely cripple you out of the game and bring them right back into it. The other way that they will try and buy time to come back into the game is with Munkidori's Mind Bend, which will confuse the active Grimmsnarl. You should always be ready for the Gardevoir to Mind Bend you, and the best way to do this is to have a Morgrim on the bench ready to evolve up into a second Grimmsnarl to then swing with once again. In this example game, I was actually able to deal with Mind Bend by retreating the Grimmsnarl into a Badoo and then knocking it out with Itchy Pollen and Frostlass and Munkidori damage. And this ended up being a really powerful play because the item lock during their turn prevented them from being able to Night Stretcher or Countercatcher to try and slow me down even more. And this basically ended up securing me the win. Ultimately, Gardevoir is a non-linear matchup, and whilst I would say it is a favourable, it can be quite difficult to play and endgames can get really awkward. So the best thing you can do is have really good awareness of what your opponent could do, try and think one step ahead of them, and be ready to respond to any way in which they might be able to slow down the game and make a comeback. The Dragapult matchup is favourable, but it is definitely one that you need to respect. Dragapult can win any matchup from Badoo item locking to taking massive board wipes with Dust Noir and Phantom Dive. However, if you do get set up correctly, I believe you win this matchup 9 times out of 10. So with that in mind, the correct way to set up is usually to have double Impidimp, double Snow Run, and Munkidori, and then you're going to Technical Machine Evolution into both Frostlass and Morgrim. This does 2 things for you. It means that your Freezing Shroud damage is going to start putting pressure on Dracloaks whilst also fueling your Munkidoris, and it's also saying to your opponent that you're pretty much guaranteed to get a Grimmsnarl on the next turn. Now, because Frostlass is putting pressure on the Dracloaks with Freezing Shroud, it means that your Shadow Bullet is free to target other Pokemon in play. So the main thing that you want to go after in this case is Duskull. Their main route into the game is if they get their Dusk Noirs and Dusclops set up. So taking out the Duskulls before they've even evolved is really, really strong and puts a real stranglehold on the game. Outside of that, if there are no Duskulls on the bench, then you basically want to start working towards your devolution play immediately. And the best way to do this is to use a Shadow Bullet onto a Dreepy. Attacking the Dreepy means they're forced to evolve into a Dracloak, where they will take even more Frostlass damage if they don't want to give up another prize. But then when they evolve into Dracloak, more damage ends up spreading onto it, and it doesn't really do much for them in the end. From here, you can initiate the devolution, and you're going to be able to do this because there will be so much damage spread around the board, and quite frankly, way too much for them to be able to deal with. Once you hit them with the devolution, it's important to remember that it's actually okay if you're not knocking out all of their Dreepies, Dracloaks, and Dragapults. This is because unless they're playing Rare Candy, if you're putting them down to just a Dreepy in play, then they're not going to get an attack on the next turn. It's usually from this point that basically regardless of what they have have in play, you're in a position where you can win the game. Even if the devolution puts you into range of something like Blood Moon Ursaluna being able to attack, if they punch your Grimmsnarl and you have 2 Munkidorys in play, you simply win the game with double Munkidori plus Shadow Bullet. So as long as you set things up correctly, as soon as you hit the devolution, it's a devastating play that they pretty much can't recover from under any circumstances. Ultimately, whilst Dragapult has ways of slowing you down with Badoo and Jamming Tower, I do find that you actually win the game a lot of the time because you will just get set up, you're not super reliant on items when you think about cards like Spike with Gym, and usually a Grimmsnarl is in play and swinging with Shadow Bullet before Dragapult is fully set up. So this usually is how you end up winning the game, by just basically overwhelming them with damage. After rotation, Grimmsnarl loses a lot of important cards like Arven, Iono, and the Technical Machines. Whilst Arven is somewhat replaceable by Team Rocket's Petrol for getting you the trainers that you need each turn, TM Evolution and really good hand disruption is a huge loss to the deck. We're probably forced to play Unfair Stamp as the A spec, and we likely have to play a second or a third rare candy so that we can more often rare candy into Grimmsnarl. We can play Pokepad as an easy way to search Frostlass, which is very useful, but the loss of Nest Ball makes Ursaluna a lot tougher to justify playing in the deck, as it's just much harder to find. Here is a preliminary post-rotation list that you could start using to test in the post-rotation format. I think a big advantage of Grimmsnarl is that it likely retains its positive Dragapult matchup, especially since some Dragapults are no longer playing Dusknoir. But my biggest concern for the future of the deck is its matchups into Mega Lucario and Terrabox, 2 decks that I believe will see somewhat of an increase in play. Mega Lucario becomes incredibly strong with the loss of Gardevoir and Gholdengo and can easily OHKO a Grimmsnarl EX. Losing Devolution also means we can't easily KO a Lucario back, since if we hit it with Shadow Bullet, they could Wally's Compassion all of the damage off of it. Terrabox is also very difficult as well. Whilst you can start playing Shaman once again to deal with Wellspring Ogerpon, Grimmsnarl is a risky attacker as we see Teal Mask Ogerpon EX and Iron Leaves EX take the forefront of the deck, which can KO Grimmsnarl for weakness very easily. On the subject of Teal Mask Ogerpon, we also saw Meganium Toolbox and a version of Mega Absol that played Teal Mask Ogerpon in the finals of the Fukuoka Champions League. It's reasonable to assume that we could see a lot of grass in the field, which could be tough to handle. Considering a big boon of Grimmsnarl was previously hitting Gardevoir for weakness, our darkness typing may have gone from a great strength to being a big hindrance in the deck. What do you think of Grimmsnarl after rotation, and what cards do you think you're going to play in the deck? Let me know in the comments down below. In conclusion, Grimmsnarl is incredibly strong in our final format before rotation, and I think it's a great play to take to any major tournaments in the Ascended Heroes format. Whether you're going to one of these events, playing it to your League Cups and Challenges, or just looking to play it online, I hope this gave you some insight into the deck and its major matchups. I would love to do more guides in this style, and will likely be looking ahead to post-rotation, so if there is more content you would like to see going forwards, please let me know. I likely won't have any videos out until April, as I'm going on holiday for much of March, but any feedback for future videos is greatly appreciated. So thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please let me know and share it with anyone looking to improve their Grimmsnarl game. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.